Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the HBCU Summit. We are here for our first panel of the morning where we will be discussing government affairs in our day-to-day lives. And we've got lobbyists and governmental affairs professionals on with us today, representing some of the nation's largest corporate entities, from Turo to Amazon, to a lobbyist who represents a number of entities, including Capital One. So without further ado, what I will do is we're going to start us off with some introductions. And I'm going to ask you, Miss Monique Frazier, will you just tell our students and university faculty and staff a little bit about your background, some of the clients you represent, and why public policy is so important to your industries?
Great. Thank you, Terry. Well, welcome. I'm really happy to be a part of this esteemed panel. I'm Monique Frazier. I'm a partner with Capital Counsel, which is a public affairs consulting firm here in Washington, D.C. We represent several different sectors, including healthcare, tax, energy, financial services, and my expertise is in the financial services area with some of our clients, as Terry mentioned, Capital One, Santander, US Bank. We have the National Association of Realtors among some of our clients that I represent here in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining Capital Counsel in June of this year, actually, I was the Senior Vice President of Federal Government Affairs with HSBC, which is one of the world's largest globally financial services companies, which is a British bank. I represented them for nearly 15 years before federal policymakers on Capitol Hill, the administration, as well as regulators. And prior to joining HSBC, I was the legislative director for a member of Congress who served on both the House Financial Services and House Energy and Commerce committees. So that's me in a brief nutshell.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Anthony, you want to go next?
All right. Good morning. Thank you, Terry. And thank you all for joining us. So I'm Anthony Williams. I lead public policy for Amazon here in California. And it's good that you're going to get a different perspective from folks who are Washington-based and folks who are state-based, because while there are some similarities, there are also some differences in terms of where our focus is. So my focus is purely on California for Amazon, which I'm told that if California were a country, it would be the second largest Amazon footprint in the world. So we'll talk about how the issues that the California legislature and local governments in California impact those businesses. So my background prior to joining Amazon about a year ago, I served as Governor Gavin Newsom's legislative affairs secretary, which basically means that I was sort of his chief go-between between the governor's office and the legislature and all that the governor was trying to accomplish there. I had served as the chief lobbyist here in California for the Boeing company. And for many years before that, different roles in and around the state capitol in Sacramento, lawyer in private practice, doing actual what I call quote unquote real lawyer work, representing clients, but also in court, but also representing clients before the legislature as a contract lobbyist. I've worked in all three branches of government at some point in my career, in the judiciary, in the legislature, and obviously for Governor Newsom in the executive branch, and now found my way back to the private sector at Amazon. So great to be here. Look forward to the conversation. I think, Terry, you had also asked just about, what public affairs or corporate government affairs means to me and the company. And I know we'll talk a lot about that, but there's very little that a company, for example, of Amazon size, that the legislature and the governor or the government at any level can do that doesn't impact those operations in some way. Some of those are obvious in terms of, for example, how we interact in terms of local zoning, all the way up to obviously how we interact with our employees, how we interact with our customers. Transportation issues are huge and significant. Broadband access obviously is huge and significant. So there are a number of issues that come before those bodies that we need to make sure that our voice is heard. And so that's my role. Great to be here.
Thank you for being here. And I'm really excited for these students to hear from you guys more about just how deeply public policy influences each of your industries. I don't think that we often go along our day-to-day lives and don't realize that decisions are being made that are affecting us in ways that we aren't even thinking about. So excited to have you guys on. Pastor John Heath, who I have to note is also the Secretary Treasurer of the NBPLA and is 1/3 of the trio that is responsible for us being able to come together today. Pastor Heath, share some knowledge with us.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Terry, and these incredible panelists. I'm glad you reached down low to add me to this group. I'm, again, Pastor John Heath. I'm a pastor. I'm also a lobbyist and government affairs professional. I lead government relations and external affairs for Turo, the world's peer-to-peer car sharing leader. I've worked at every level of government, worked in the Congress, have worked as a senior advisor to a governor, mayors, have served as a chief of staff in state legislatures, been a consultant, led statewide associations. Prior to coming back to Turo, this is my second stint. I led government relations and external affairs for the Rock family of companies. You will know certain brands like Rocket Mortgage, the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's about 100 companies in that conglomerate, and led government relations and external affairs for that large entity. But back now at Turo and really trying to work in the policy space basically now we're moving into a federal space, but primarily with state lawmakers. And then we will probably graduate into the local space to make sure that there are frameworks for you as citizens to leverage your second largest asset, which is your vehicle. And particularly for the Black community, Latino communities, members of the API community, women, those wealth gaps and income gaps persist. And we hope that through sharing your vehicle, in some cases just for 10 days a month, that will bring a good chunk of resources, dollars, dinero, greenbacks into your home, that you might be able to deal with this shifting economy and where your dollar is shrinking, but costs are increasing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you really hit on some of the ways policy impacts your industry. I want to go back to you, Anthony, and ask you if you'll elaborate on some of the issues you touched on with Amazon. I think people kind of think of Amazon as just the company that delivers those packages to your house. I know I, for one, have way too many of them coming to my house.
Thank you.
That's another panel for another day. But there's so many things that Amazon is involved in on a local government level, I imagine, certainly state and federal. Can you kind of highlight some of those top public policy issues that Amazon is focused on and trying to give our students an idea of what your work is centered around and how it can impact their lives?
Great. No, thank you. Yeah. So I guess one way I mentioned, California, we're a country, would be Amazon's second largest footprint. And part of the reason for that is that it's an interesting and unique place. It also, as a state, has a lot of diversity in terms of geographic, urban and rural, pretty much has it all on a pretty big scale. I mean, we got 40 million people in the state. But more than that, Amazon has decided, either through just, I'm sure with some intentionality, but also just our natural growth, to headquarter big chunks of a lot of its businesses. People think of what you mentioned in terms of Amazon as the package delivery company. They don't necessarily think of Amazon as Amazon Studios, which is obviously now a major motion picture and television studio based here in California, here in Southern California. We actually have physical stores. And so every aspect of our physical stores is located here in California, from our Amazon Books, Amazon Store, Amazon Go, and Fresh stores. And also we own Whole Foods Market that many of you may be familiar with. And we have a number of those stores here in California. And then the thing that I think surprises most people is that this Zoom that we're on right now, and most of the internet that you're using, is powered by Amazon Web Services, which is pretty much the backbone of the internet. I think 60 to 65% of all internet traffic goes through Amazon Web servers. And so that's a huge part of our footprint here, because that's also, again, a physical footprint. Those are data centers that are located throughout the state. Those are all of our tech and corporate personnel who are obviously in the Silicon Valley, but really all over the state of California. So we have over 200,000 what we call blue badge or Amazon employees in the state of California. We have I think now 24 fulfillment centers. We call them fulfillment centers. Most folks refer to them as warehouses. Those are littered all over the state. So we're in a lot of local jurisdictions. I'll take, for example, the Amazon Web Services piece, where you have these data centers that are, on the grid. They're using energy. They're using natural resources like water. There's land and permitting issues related to those data centers. And so we are in environmental policy issues. We're in land use policy issues. All of those decisions that are made by state and local officials affect our ability to just house a data center. So now you go beyond that to our fulfillment centers and our delivery stations and our sortation centers. We have a range of those physical plants that help people get their packages. And, those are obviously staffed by a number of people. There's a lot of square footage involved. There's traffic issues involved with that we have to be good neighbors. We have to make sure that we are environmentally conscious. In fact, some of those fulfillment centers are located in some of our most impacted communities in terms of air quality issues. So we are constantly working with local government to ensure that our operations do not add to the burdens on those communities. We're rolling out our fleet of 100,000, part of our fleet of 100,000 electric vans here in California first, again, because of where those impacts are, and we have the ability to test in different geographic locations. And then, obviously, one of the big issues that most of you have heard about is our interaction with our employees. And, we're actually very proud. It's a story that doesn't get told, that we were 3 years ahead of California and still light years ahead of the federal government in terms of the minimum wage. We raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour 3-4 years ago. We pay full benefits on day one for our workers. That me as an executive, I get the same benefits as a frontline fulfillment center worker on day one. Several weeks of paid leave. Like these are like things that are far beyond. But we're not a union workforce, so we have a lot of labor issues that we deal with. We are actually very proud of our partnership with our employees. They speak for themselves, as they did, earlier this year in Alabama. It's not, we're not necessarily, taking a victory lap about that, but it is an indication of the relationship that we do have. But those are issues that are constant challenges, because we do get a lot of pushback and political activity around the fact that we don't engage with unions directly. So they go to the legislature, they go to the Congress, they go to the local city councils to make their presence felt. So we are constantly dealing with those issues, and in a way that that would, if they were successful, would severely impact our ability, first, to deliver for our customers, and second, to have direct relationships with our employees. So we're constantly telling our side of the story, and it's really important to do that, because there are things that can happen. I've seen it in other industries where there's silence, you don't react, or you use other people to tell your story, and then you get hit. I'll just tell one quick thing. When I was at Boeing, many people didn't know, when Boeing first started as an air manufacturer, they were also an airline. As the air industry was growing, Boeing was both manufacturing airplanes and serving as a passenger airline service. And they were very successful, even at a time during the Great Depression. And there was a lot of populism around that. People didn't like the fact that this company was making a lot of money when everybody else was hurting. And so populism arose, Congress came after them, and they broke up. And in fact, it's interesting because they were selling planes to regional airlines that were very inefficient. And so they united those airlines, and that became United Airlines. The company that we know today was an offshoot of the Boeing company. Well, when Boeing was broken up, because they used celebrities and other people to go to Congress, and it didn't work. They didn't tell their own story. There wasn't a very professionalized way to quote unquote lobby at that time. And the company was eventually broken up. Bill Boeing, who started the company, sold all of his stock and got out of the aviation business forever. Clearly, there's still a Boeing that exists at a much smaller scale. You do wonder what might have happened. Maybe it was good, maybe it wasn't. But it was just an indication of how direct the impact might be when you don't have people like Monique and Pastor Heath and others like me who are doing that and carrying those voices. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Anthony. The thing that I'll point out, and Monique, I want you to speak on the same thing from the financial services perspective, but there was nothing that Mr. Williams mentioned that's not impacted or affected, regulated or legislated at either the local, state, or federal level, whether you're talking about electric vehicles or unions or production studios. There's always some arm of government that's going to have an interest in what's happening in business. And so for our students, I want you to see how detailed and intricate the public policy process is for corporate America. And I'm going to ask you, Monique, to kind of speak on that from your background in banking and financial services.
Thank you, Terry. And I must take a point of personal privilege. I was remiss to not mention that I am a proud Howard University graduate. I know we're speaking to HBCU students, so I'm definitely a proud Bison. I have my Bison blue on today. So yes, as you mentioned, as far as oversight regulations, despite what people may think, similar to what Anthony said about Amazon, financial services and the banking industry is a highly regulated industry. I know that many of you are probably too young or very young during the midst of the global financial crisis, but that was, an unfortunate set of events that were triggered by circumstances around affordability of mortgages, and the contagion globally had a big impact not only on America, but the world. And so as a result of, that's just one example of a result of what Congress will do, and as well as local officials, but in financial services, most of the regulation is on the federal level because we have something called preemption, which sets a national standard for many of the services that they provide, that they provide, as well as products. And that involves whether it's interstate services, so your credit card, your bank accounts, interest rates, student loans that I'm sure many of you have. Many of those products and services are regulated on the federal level. And as Terry mentioned, and as Anthony emphasized, it is extremely critical for those entities to have a voice and provide input, particularly to policymakers who are usually reacting to an event or a circumstance in the public sphere. As I mentioned with the global financial crisis during President Obama's term, they were responding to the effects that had, and more importantly, wanted to prevent it from happening again. So whether it was capping or having more disclosure around interest rate payments, as far as having more disclosure or limiting the types of fees that could be collected, whether it's for late payments or things like that, making sure that the products that banks offered were affordable and that the clients could repay them in a responsible way. Those are things that Congress were very much focused on. And at that time, I had left Capitol Hill and had joined HSBC, which I mentioned is one of the largest banks in the world, and not only one of the largest banks in the world, but also what is considered a foreign bank because they are British. And so I was able to see firsthand that not only the impact of the crisis and what was happening to individuals in their own personal circumstance, but I was also representing them, the company, to policymakers as they considered remedies and wanted to enact laws that, again, that would prevent something like that from happening. So it's integral to have a voice. I tell people there is nothing that the federal government doesn't regulate. They regulate the water you drink, the air you breathe, the places where you live. So it is really important for you to be engaged. And in whatever level you determine that to be, it is just your responsibility. And I always say to young people, why do you think older people vote? Why do you think that seniors vote in extraordinary numbers for every election, whether it's on the local, state, federal level? Because they understand the power of that vote. They understand that if they want to elect policymakers who reflect their values, who reflect their positions on certain issues, they know that that power is in the elected officials that we send to Washington to represent our interests. So Terry, I hope I've covered most of what you wanted me to convey. More than happy to elaborate more, but just wanted to kind of set some context around, particularly in the financial services industry, what they face. And not only that, with innovation, I mean, I'm sure many of you use Cash App. I'm sure many of you use Zelle, who happens to be one of our clients, Zelle, which I use weekly. But you're seeing the combination of technology with financial services, and that is creating, again, these are innovative products, and the government, despite, again, what people think, their job is not to necessarily prevent innovation, but they want to make sure that it's done in a responsible manner. And I think that for many of the technological firms who are getting involved in finance, they don't necessarily recognize or have a true appreciation for the level of regulation that is involved when you interact with your bank account. It's protected by so many things. If something were to happen and someone compromised your identity, the reason why you are not responsible for that is because the banks have certain guidelines and compliance to make sure that you're not responsible for anything that's done illegally on your accounts. And so I think many of them are understanding that more now. I know that we're getting more calls from some of these firms, and you're seeing some of the regulators speak out about them around consumer protection issues. And so I think that's a new frontier. Anything involving money is going to have the government's attention. So I think that's only going to continue to grow.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to take a second and reset our students and invite you all to drop any questions that you may have in the chat. There's also a feature where you can raise your hand. If you raise your hand, I'll be able to see it, and I'm happy to unmute you, and you can ask questions of our panelists. Pastor Heath, I want to switch gears a little bit with you, and certainly want to give you an opportunity to talk about the impact of public policy at Touro. But having known you, I know how important and that you've made it a personal charge to help increase diversity in this profession. So I want to ask you to kind of talk about some of the trends that you've observed in corporate governmental affairs environments as it relates to diversity, and also would ask you to speak to any challenges or opportunities that has presented to you in your career.
Certainly. Thank you, Terry. The challenge still remains that we are not prevalent in lobbying circles, whether it's federal, whether it's state, whether it's local. We still have, how shall I say, a minimal representation. While we have these fantastic professionals like Anthony, while we have these incredible sheroes like Monique, there is still so much work to do. And subsequently, that's why NBPLA was birthed, to be that vehicle, to knock on corporate doors, to begin to start the dialogue. I'll just put it out there, Monique, with her background working with financial services institutions, the CEO of Wells Fargo made a statement that was incredulous for many of us. He said he couldn't find no Black folk. That's absurd. And so there's so many incredible, qualified individuals. When I hear of Anthony's resume, his experience, aerospace, there's a great History Channel program that deals with the creation of airlines. So I was on point, Anthony, with understanding Boeing's history. But
I'm not gonna confirm or deny whether Boeing highly financed that project, but that's part of telling your story. It's another mechanism of lobbying. Sorry to interrupt you.
Indeed. And so we've now, positioned ourselves as an organization to be able to knock on these corporate doors, to be able to knock on firm doors, because that's a whole nother deal. That's why you have this diversity in panel, that Monique represents a firm, that Anthony and I both are in corporate settings, but the necessity to knock down some doors even, to gently force our way in, to give these students opportunities that perhaps we did not have. We're certainly blessed. We are certainly recognized in our fields, but it's so much more wonderful when you can see others in the room, and not for you to have to be the only Black lobbying professional in spaces. We want to make sure that we're much more prevalent. And while many people talk about the absence of other ethnicities and women in spaces, we chose to focus on Black lobbyists. We have the hardest time in breaking into this. Our lawmakers who retire or who are no longer in office don't get the same opportunities that their white counterparts do, falling into rainmaker positions or being managing partners. That does not happen for our lawmakers. So we are endeavoring, Terry, not only to push for the next generation, which we have in our attendees, but even for persons who are already in the field, making sure that they're able to access opportunity. And then for our lawmakers who are retiring or who are no longer in office, making sure that they have a pathway to leverage their experience and to contribute to their ability to create generational wealth.
Anthony, Monique, do one of you want to chime in there?
Yeah, no, I would absolutely. I would say I agree with that 100%. And a lot of the way, we're going to talk probably a little bit about how relationships matter in this business. And those relationships extend even to who's given an opportunity to make the case for a client or a company. And, I had the benefit here in California, starting my career many, many years ago, when a gentleman by the name of Willie Brown, who became the mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown was the Speaker of the Assembly. And Maxine Waters, who's now, as we all know, in Congress, and I know Monique, Representative Waters very well, she was in the Assembly. And I think she kind of had an unwritten rule that if you came in to lobby her, and she didn't see any diversity among your lobbying team or your lobbying corps, you might have gotten the meeting, but she put a lot of pressure on you to change that. Willie Brown did the same thing and provided, but not only did they provide opportunities, they actually mentored and cultivated people. So what happens is that opens doors, and then when lobbying professionals of color get into these corporations or in these firms, then when, to Pastor Heath's point, when those members are coming out, you've got these relationships, these circles of relationships that when the Congress member or the state senator or the state House member are coming out of office, they have a welcome home, or they have somebody who's speaking for them and vouching for them and helping to pay it forward and pay it back for the help that they got. And it's not like you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Actually, it kind of is, but in a very, very positive way. And it's critical for us to be part of that entire circle so that we can build that core of folks who can be successful in this business. It's a very hard business to get into, and it's so based on these relationships that, so, hopefully we'll talk about how you can get in there and start developing those relationships early on.
Terry, I'd just like to add to what Anthony said. He's always leading me exactly where I'd like to go. As he mentioned, Chairwoman Waters, now of the House Financial Services Committee that has oversight over financial institutions as well as their regulators, as he said, she has been very clear that diversity was a priority for her. In a couple of Congresses ago, she established in Congress the first subcommittee on diversity and inclusion. She is still the only full committee to have such a subcommittee. And her point was clear. It is integral for spaces like finance to be diverse. There needs to be diverse experiences, diverse perspectives. When you're dealing with access to capital, access to mortgages, access to lending of any type, you want to make sure that those voices are heard and, more importantly, are represented, because that's who their clients represent them. If you look at, as Pastor Heath said, it was entirely unconscionable what was said by the CEO of Wells Fargo. And more importantly, because I personally have a dear friend who is a brilliant African-American lobbyist that represents them, who went to UC Berkeley Law School and is a native Californian. And so I just found his comments to be beyond just, beyond irresponsible. It just wasn't accurate. So, but that said, there is still a dearth in this space, particularly in finance. I'm often the only person of color in the room. It used to be I was the only person, and a person of color and a female, but I've seen both increase, but the need is still there. Even at my current firm that I told you I joined about 4 months ago, I'm only one of 2 partners, African-American partners in the entire firm. We have former senators who are, partners at the firm. We have former members of Congress who are partners at the firm, but I'm still one of 2, and I was hired 4 months ago. So that tells you that the need is still there. I think that, as Anthony mentioned, you're going to have policymakers who continue to stress that point, particularly because now currently in Congress, you have several members of the Congressional Black Caucus who are chairing committees within Congress. And so they make it clear that this is a priority for them, and not just for the symbolism of diversity. It is for the talent and the expertise that is brought from those individuals and their experiences.
And Terry, I might add that diversity, and we must go all the way out, equity and inclusion does not mean that the individual is incapable or inferior. And that's one of the things that we want to help majority companies. For the most part, most of these institutions, companies are still led by people who do not look like us, who do oftentimes carry implicit biases and are in many cases ill-informed. You, for example, and I both have relationships on both sides of the aisle. So you can't just say because I'm Black, I only have Democratic relationships. No, I have GOP relationships. I have independent relationships. And one of the things that we've also expressed about Black lobbyists is many of us bring a grassroots contingent to our work that oftentimes our white counterparts don't have. If you've got a Black female lobbyist who's a Delta, well, she can bring in Delta Day and just take over the Capitol, the AKAs, the Alphas, the Kappas. As a pastor, I have relationships with ministerial groups. And so there are advantages. So I just wanted to put that footnote that diversity, equity, and inclusion does not mean that you're doing someone a favor, does not mean that you're getting an inferior candidate, an inferior professional. No, quite the opposite. You're getting the cream of the crop. And that's what we want to help rise up, to have these high 5-star performers make the way for other people, because it's only when we have those high performing individuals that some of the folks that don't look like us will then open up the doors for more of us.
Love it. Love it. And I want to speak to the importance of opening up this pipeline. I mean, this is the whole reason that we are doing this summit and trying to touch as many students as we can, because, you know, the next generation of talent, first of all, they have to know that this is a career path that's an option, a career path where you can, you know, take really good care of yourself and your families. And so we want them to know that it's an option for them. But how and what advice would you have for young students who are considering this career path? How do they get themselves in a position to come work at a company like a Toro or Amazon or Capital One? And what steps can they be taking right now to develop the skill sets that are necessary to be successful in this industry? Anthony, I know you mentioned relationship building. I'd love for each of you to touch on that and some other skills and practices that they can be cultivating right now. And I want to ask Monique, if you will, to start us off, because I want everybody on the call and everybody that ends up watching this to know, like, this woman is bad. Her resume is just, it's top notch. She's worked at some of the biggest companies in the world. And, you know, for her to be, first of all, she's there because she's brilliant, but she's a Black female. I'm sure you're often the only person in the room that looks like you. And I just want you to tell the students some of the things that you did to get to that level, and what can they be doing to follow in your footsteps.
Well, great. Thank you, Terry, and for those kind words. But as Pastor Heath said, I think it's really important.
Monique, it's easy to tell the truth. It's easy.
Thank you. Thank you. So for me, I was one of those students that, and I'm going to date myself, even though I hear that they have a new revamped version, but when I was a child, in between my cartoons on Saturdays, I saw the Schoolhouse Rock. I saw the I'm Just a Bill. I was like, okay, that's where they make the law. Because I knew what laws were. I knew we had to follow them just as, you know, humans and citizens. And so for me, my interest in influence or being a part of forming laws that not only had jurisdiction over me, but my family and my community always interests me. So it was one of the reasons why I was interested in coming to a university in the Washington, D.C. area, because I knew that I had an interest. I didn't know where that interest would take me, but I knew that there was an interest in public policy, because even at that time, I thought my traditional path would be the legal profession, because my mom said I talk a lot. So, and I do like the law. And so for me, I thought that would be my trajectory. And so when I was a student at Howard, I had an opportunity for an internship on Capitol Hill. And just to illustrate what Pastor Heath said, yes, ideally at that time, I was interested in working for a CBC member, of course, because I thought that, you know, I would have more, you know, in common, and that we, you know, I would possibly have more, you know, interest in what they were advocating, but that opportunity didn't present itself. So I did have an opportunity to intern for a Republican woman from Kansas City, Kansas. And she was phenomenal. She was a very moderate pro-choice. She probably wouldn't be able to be a Republican today, but at that time, she was a very, moderate Republican woman. And I interned there, and the experience was incredible. I learned a tremendous amount. They provided me opportunities for not only, doing the things that you have to do when you're an intern in terms of kind of the day-to-day duties, but I had a lot of exposure to other policymakers. Obviously, at that time, I remember there was one African-American congressman from Connecticut, Gary Franks, who was a member of Congress at that time. So I would see him at events, and I'm still a student and definitely have my own political convictions that weren't necessarily aligned with hers, but they weren't in a way so different that I couldn't, possibly, I felt like somehow my integrity was being compromised. She was an incredible member. And more importantly, I wanted to see how a woman in this position, because I understood that she had to be here, 4 days a week, and she flew home every weekend, and she had her own family. So I was really interested in seeing how it impacted her life. And so that's where I began my career, interning for a female Republican member while I was a student at Howard University. Fortunately for me, I was able to secure a position after I graduated on Capitol Hill, which is rare, but I know that one of the things that one of the advantages I had is that I had the experience from being an intern. So, all things equal, that experience is probably what propelled me. And I also worked for my home state delegation from Louisiana. So that was great as well. And at the time, I deferred law school. I thought, I would still go down that path because I was interested in the law. But working on Capitol Hill completely changed my perspective because, again, I was on the front end of public policy, not after the public policy was enacted into law and we had to adhere to whatever was enacted. I was on the side where we could shape that policy and take into consideration the potential impacts that would have. And it completely changed the trajectory of my career. The reason why I was able to pivot into financial services, all things considered, I was a poli-sci major. I was a liberal arts major. My brother was, my older brother was the accounting finance guy. And so I really never really had a genuine interest outside of just being a consumer. I used credit cards, sometimes not as wisely when I was a college student, but I knew certain things around, whether it was an auto, your car, your first car, again, things that you do. And I had an opportunity to, in between that, I did have an opportunity to work for President Clinton at the Corporation for National Community Service, which was the AmeriCorps program. And we also supported the Points of Life Foundation, America's Promise, a lot of nonprofits, Catholic charities that are doing fantastic things throughout the country. So that was great. That was a wonderful thing. And I forgot to mention that part. So that was a great experience. And then I had an opportunity to work for a member, as I said, who thought he was going to be on the budget committee. That's what he wanted to do. That was his first choice. And Energy and Commerce was his second choice, but he was a freshman member. And so he was appointed to the House Financial Services Committee, which was a newly formed committee at that time because of laws that had been changed that allowed the diversification of financial services products. So you had a State Farm that would normally offer insurance products. They could then offer, other types of services in financial services products. And so they merged the committee. And I was the legislative director. And so I supervised the entire legislative staff, but I also had my own set of issues in my portfolio, which was the entire financial services committee. And again, I was in the middle of purchasing my first home and living in Washington, and just the information and the education you get from having mortgage bankers in your office or having the realtors or the appraisers and people like that. And you're gathering all this information from them because they're interested in public policy that may affect their industry. And I loved it. I thought it was something that I wouldn't necessarily have been interested in, but I understood the real world impact of that industry, not only on my life, but on my community's life. And so I understood the disparities that existed. I mean, just from, data and evidence, and also just anecdotally, you talk to family, you talk to friends, you recognize that many of these issues are structural and they're systemic. And so I wanted to be a part of changing that and having some influence on that. And so fortunately, I had a member who really believed in me and believed in my competency and really allowed me to grow in that position, and was recruited from the Hill by HSBC to come and represent them. So again, I always say to students, be open to the possibilities. You never know where life may take you. I mean, I had no idea that I would end up where I was, and I was there for over a decade, and I enjoyed it tremendously. I was able to travel the world and represent them, and go to our headquarters in London often, and Brussels to represent us. And so I think it's one of those things where yes, experience matters. Obviously, your academics matter, but it really is around the relationships that I was able to cultivate during those experiences.
That's wonderful. Anthony, you want to chime in there?
Yeah, just I would. It's very similar to Monique in the sense that I chose my undergraduate school for pretty much the same reason. It was the closest University of California to the state capital. I went to UC Davis as an undergrad. I was a political science major. And I sort of got my foot in the door at the Capitol. I always dreamed of working at the Capitol. We didn't come from, let's just say, privileged beginnings. We struggled. My mother pretty much raised us. My father, who is my best friend, was remarried, but we have a great relationship now. Had a decent relationship then, but we were at home with mom, and I remember her driving my sister to her part-time job downtown, and we passed by this big white building, and I'm like, what is that? And I was like 5 miles away from the state capitol and had never been there, never been inside, and just got the bit right there. Like, that's where I want to work someday. So, imagine when I did walk those steps to go in there with my Capitol badge, it was a pretty interesting moment. But went to UC Davis, got an internship at the Capitol for a year. I looked around and I thought to myself, who's doing what I want to do, 5-10 years from now? And of course, I aimed high, and I looked at Willie Brown. I mentioned him earlier. He was the speaker, and he was a lawyer. I said, okay, that's what I got to do. So I started applying. I ended up doing, and I got some feedback from others. I decided to do the joint degree program. So for those of you who are considering public policy and law, you can do both. So when I applied to do both. I went to Harvard, and I got my master's at the Kennedy School of Government. But I hated the law part. I worked for a law firm my first summer. I hated it. I don't want to be a lawyer. So I dropped the law piece, left the law school. I had one of my advisors said to me, you need to have your head examined. You don't leave a slot at Harvard Law School. Like, what the heck's wrong with you? Well, it wasn't for me at the time. I come back. I work in Sacramento, started again developing those relationships. I had a job with the courts that got me in before the legislature. I was basically a lobbyist for the judiciary. Yes, even the judiciary needs a lobbyist. So I worked my way up there. And then when the Senate leader at the time had an opening, I went back to work for him, and I was his judiciary advisor. But guess what? I didn't have the law degree. So I went back at night at ABA approved law school in Sacramento, McGeorge School of Law. At night, while working at the Capitol, I'm staffing the Senate leader on public safety and judiciary issues, crimes, and judicial procedure while learning the law. I felt like having that credential and having that credibility and having that knowledge was going to help me in my profession. And so that also led to building other relationships. I got to know more lawyers, judges, and all of that stuff because I had an interest in that particular area of the law. That led me to the state bar. I was the California State Bar's chief lobbyist after I left the Senate, that stint in the Senate. So all of these relationships built on each other, and it eventually got me to where I am. I want to just pull back though, because for those of you who are like thinking, how do I get my foot in the door? There's the Monique and the Anthony way where you're an intern and then a staffer, and you you get these opportunities. But there are also other ways. I know other lobbyists, people who are my colleagues and peers, people who are working for me now, who go through trade associations. So these trade associations can be for businesses, but they can also be for nonprofit organizations. They can be, and these are basically, you take, for example, one of the biggest trade associations, the Chamber of Commerce, whether it's the U.S. Chamber or any state chamber. These are a collection of companies that pay a membership for an organization to represent them in their interests. You go, that's another pathway. Go knock on that door. And if I think all of us would be available to anybody who's on this call to say, hey, you have an interest in a state, a trade association, or a particular area, we probably know somebody. It's like 1 or 2 degrees of separation where we can make an introduction. But that's the kind of thing that you want to do, is just be aggressive and then prepare yourself, right? Do the homework at the beginning. Like, who are they? What are the issues they represent? What issues do they take positions on? You can find all that stuff. Now, as we know, Monique and Pastor Heath, we didn't have Google. We were trying to figure this stuff out, but you do. So prepare yourself, knock on those doors, literally and figuratively, and say, hey, I'm interested. Let me spend a week shadowing you. I shadowed folks. I did whatever I could to learn what this was all about. And not only, it might lead you to a amazing career as a staffer in whatever legislative body or executive, whatever the case may be, or an association, or as a contract lobbyist or an in-house lobbyist at a corporation. But there's so many different pathways. You can take advantage of any of them. But I would say, to just wrap it up, Monique and I think Pastor Heath share the same comment. Like, we started out as staff people because we knew the inside. And when you work on the inside, you really understand the process. And that is where your value is relationships are important, but process is also very important to this line of work.
Absolutely. And Pastor Heath, I want to let you chime in there too, and I'll let our students know we're coming up on the end of the hour. Last chance to drop questions in the chat. If we can't get to them, go ahead and put them in there anyway, and we'll try and work to get you some answers to your questions offline. Pastor Heath, what do you have to say about that?
I really cannot add any more to what Monique and Anthony have shared. They've laid it all out. All of us have our different pathways. They are products of these preeminent institutions. UC Davis does have a Black chancellor, I might add, who we're very proud of. I went to the United Baptist College and Seminary, a church HBCU that's now defunct. I didn't have the esteemed ability to go to the real HU or Harvard, but God has a way of weaving us all in our various paths. What I will say is that relationships, can I say it one more time? Relationships are so critical to your trajectory, critical to your upward mobility. Your horizontal relationships will propel you vertically. I'm a living witness to that. I will say, when you're creating these relationships, understand that it's beyond establishing. You've got to maintain, you've got to cultivate. When you have these relationships, don't call people when you just want something or need something. Call them when you don't need anything. If they come across your mind, shoot a text, give a call, an email. Hey, I was just checking on you. Or how's your wife doing? I heard she had surgery. Or how's your daughter doing in the softball tournament? Those are things that mean a lot to elected officials, to lobbyists, and to others, because we live in a transactional world that everybody wants something. And when they identify individuals who care about them as a person, I've found as lobbyists, that's one of our greatest tools, is to be sincere, to be authentic with lawmakers. with their staff. Let's not forget, it's not just the principal. We're former staffers. Trust and believe that you can have a relationship with that member, but you need relationships with those staffers, because guess what? It's those staffers that are going to do the work, not the member. They're going to carry your agenda. So relationships are so critical. Treasure them, cultivate them, and make sure that individuals understand that your focus is not just simply your agenda. Yes, you do have one. All of us have one. But when people understand that you care about them, you will find folks going to bat for you, folks that will call people on your behalf. They will be moved in ways that they would not be moved if you don't manage relationships properly. So whether it's once you're in the business, trying to get in the business, your relationships are going to be so key. Maintain, cultivate them. Your relationships will take you to places where living witnesses that you never thought that you'd ever see.
Amen.
I'm
That's
telling
a
you.
word right there. A word right there. Well, listen, we have about
Terry,
two-
can I say one thing? I don't know
Absolutely.
if you have a question, but I gotta, there's one piece of advice that just to build on what Pastor Heath was saying, because he mentioned authenticity and the importance of one thing that I've learned in this business, and it's been over 30 years for me. Your reputation is your bond, it's your stock and trade. Don't compromise that. I think it was Maya Angelou who said, people may not remember what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. In our business, your integrity, people may not remember that, you know, what you said, but they will remember if you lied to them, if you were dishonest. You will not, we talking about building these relationships, make sure that those relationships you build are built out of honesty and truth, because you will be severely handicapped as you go through your career if you develop that a poor relationship of being, you know, because yeah, we move from issue to issue. And again, people won't remember what the issue was, they won't remember what the bill was, they won't remember, but if you lied to them about something, they will never forget it. So keep your integrity intact throughout all of this.
Yes, and I'm sorry, just Anthony, absolutely. Trust is everything in our industry. If policymakers don't trust what you have to say, you won't do well. You will not do well in this industry, because it is critical. It is critical.
Wonderful, wonderful words of wisdom today. I want to thank our panelists so much. We're right on time, 11 o'clock on the dot. Thank you for all this wisdom. Attendees, please feel free to drop your information in the chat. We'll get you added to the NBPLA mailing list. And I encourage everyone to join us in 15 minutes. We'll wrap up our HBCU Summit with our keynote speaker, Congresswoman Alma Adams out of North Carolina. We're looking forward to speaking with her and hearing about the fabulous work that she's doing in DC on behalf of the HBCUs. Monique, Anthony, Pastor Heath, thank you all so much for a wonderful dialogue today. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.